It's the twinspires Racing Roundtable. I'm Ashley Anderson, back from a little vacation, here with James Scully and Vance Hansen to cover a lot of prep action for the Breeders' Cup, Kentucky Derby and Oaks prep races as well at Santa Anita, Keeneland, Belmont at Aqueduct, and ParisLongchamp as well. There are a number of races we're going to talk about today. So Vance, let's just jump right into the Breeders' Cup prep action, probably focus more on the 3-year-old and up races since we have Derby and Oaks to talk about in the next segment. So what were your main takeaways from the Breeders' Cup winning your ends this weekend?
Well, one of the Breeders' Cup races I thought that was most heavily impacted by the weekend's actions was the Breeders' Cup Mile. And we had several strong performances at Keeneland, led by Carl Spackler's win in the Coolmore Turf Mile. He led wire to wire winning that race. But I certainly wouldn't sleep on runner-up More Than Looks, who turned in a terrific late kick to whittle down Carl Spackler's winning margin to a diminishing length at the finish. And keep in mind also that More Than Looks was making only his second start of the season here in the Coolmore Turf Mile, and so he'll enter the Breeders' Cup relatively fresh. More Than Looks ran in last year's Breeders' Cup Mile at Santa Anita. He was unfortunately had a wide draw, and he found himself near the tail of the field most of the way, but he did close to within 2 lengths of Master of the Seas. So this is a horse I think we should be keeping an eye on, and he has already kind of proven himself against some really good world-class competition previously. So Carl Spackler, More Than Looks, I think are really 2 solid American-based horses for this year's mile. Another horse that came out of the Keeneland races on Saturday was the mare Gina Romantica. She again proved that she runs her best races in the fall, repeating her win in the First Lady. Trainer Chad Brown already has Carl Spackler for the mile, but this mare only lost the Breeders' Cup Mile herself last year by a length. So she wouldn't be totally out of place if her connections decided to try her again there. But there's a possibility they might skip the Breeders' Cup this year and just maybe aim for the Matriarch Stakes at the end of the Del Mar meet, which wouldn't be a bad move either. One other Breeders' Cup Mile development I'd mention was at Longchamp on Saturday. The 3-year-old filly Ramatuelle looked amazing, beating older males in the Prix de la Forêt over 7 furlongs. And I think she will add even more depth to the European contingent, which is led by dual Group 1 winner Notable Speech, the 3-year-old colt, and then the 3-year-old filly Porta Fortuna. So Ramatuelle, Notable Speech, Porta Fortuna, I think are going to be some solid European contenders for the mile. Before I turn it over to James, I just want to mention a couple of Breeders' Cup contenders whose candidacies I thought took a serious hit over the weekend. One was Raging Sea, who is a prohibitive favorite in the Beldame Stakes at Aqueduct. She was coming off of a nice win against Idiomatic in the Personal Ensign, but she was really life and death to win the Beldame over a vastly inferior rival. And Chad Brown was concerned about her regressing off of the Personal Ensign. That's why he skipped the Spinster to run her in the Beldame. Obviously a vastly easier spot on paper, but she made really hard work of it. And as a general rule, I'm not a fan of runs like this going into the Breeders' Cup. I think perhaps she's lost a little bit of momentum that she gained at Saratoga. And then the other horse I thought who regressed badly was Sweet Azteca, who ran out of the money in the Chillingworth Stakes at Santa Anita on Saturday. That caused bridge jumpers who bet her heavily to place to wail in agony. I was always a bit suspect that keeping her in California in advance of the filly and mare sprint to overpower ostensibly weaker opposition wasn't going to be ideal Breeders' Cup preparation, and at least on Saturday that proved to be the case, James.
Yeah, I mean, before I get in my points, I agree with you about Sweet Azteca. I mean, I think both the sprint and the female sprint, filly and mare sprint picks are completely different than they were in the spring or going into the summer. We got all these like late developers coming along in there, and I don't want any of those early season winners in either race on the main track. My main takeaway regarding the Breeders' Cup action from the weekend surrounds Carl Spackler. First off, let me just say, Chad Brown is an 18-time Breeders' Cup race winner, including the 2019 mile with Uni. But Brown has never had a turf miler as formidable as Carl Spackler. I thought that was a superb one-length tally in the Coolmore Turf Mile on Saturday. And what I think is perhaps being a little bit missed in the aftermath of that performance is just how much better Carl Spackler has gotten in his last two races. This isn't the same horse we were watching win the Kelso back in July. His win in the 4-Star Dave back in mid-August was, I thought, his best performance up to date in his career. And I thought his race on Saturday was much better than that too. So I just think he is absolutely peaking at the right time. Chad Brown's never had a miler to me who's come in like looking quite as formidable as he does. I agree with Vance's points about more than looks. He missed a prep in the Lure early in the Saratoga meet, which took him to the 4-Star Dave for his seasonal return. And he ran okay to be second in that. He ran better on Saturday to be second. He started off the layoff in the Breeders' Cup Mile. If there's a hot pace in there, he's going to be one of the late runners getting involved in the stretch. And as far as Gina Romanica goes, way better performance this year than last year. She's coming into the mile better off of a better effort than she did last year when she got beat a mile. I won't be surprised to see any of those runners make an impact. I've talked on and on. Vance talked about the 3-year-old milers. So there's going to have to be 3-year-olds coming over for Europe to win some of these Breeders' Cup races because our older horses are not good. They're not. I'm going to say this: they're nowhere near as good as we've seen in at least the last decade. The quality and the depth is just not there this year. Sunday's Arc was a perfect example. This, Blue Stocking. I bet a venture against her last time, and she was fortunate. I mean, she rallied to get that win, but she had been exposed. Her previous Grade 1 win before her previous stakes win was over Emily Upjohn. I don't think she's a real stellar filly or mare. I think that was one of the weakest arcs we've seen, and I'm not intimidated by any of the older horses coming for Europe, and I think the Americans are going to more than hold their own in this year's mile. Idiomatic looked great. She earned her best Brisnet speed rating. She was on the right part of the track, but still, that was a really sharp tune-up and set Sunday Spinster. And I'll also mention the federal judge who won Friday's Phoenix. He led wire to wire. Once again, a lot of wire to wire wins or front running wins on Keeneland's main track. But the fact is, he got a huge number. He's still a lightly raced gelding who's coming on for Brad Cox, and he's going to bring serious speed to the Breeders' Cup Sprint. And those were really my takes, mainly at Keeneland, Ashley, Vance.
So I am curious, talking about ParisLongchamp, because we had soft going. A lot of these European invaders, they're pretty respected over at the Breeders' Cup. But when you take horses that were running on soft turf and then put them over here at Del Mar, what do you make of, this weekend's results? Vance, are you looking more at, there were some runners that didn't do quite as well, but maybe on firm turf will bounce back. So how do you kind of decipher from those results?
Well, we can look back at some of the past performances of some of the horses that are coming over, and not all of them were in Paris over this past weekend. And I'll just bring up a couple of the horses I mentioned earlier for the Breeders' Cup Mile. Notable Speech actually has run some of his. Didn't run so well in his most recent start in the Prix de Milan at Longchamp, but that was run over a soft turf course. He proved in the 2,000 Guineas and Sussex Stakes earlier this year that he much prefers faster ground. Same with Porta Fortuna. She's been pretty much unstoppable over the last few months in Group 1 company, but she's run very well on all sorts of surfaces before. So I think those two will appreciate the firm ground at Del Mar. And I mentioned Ramatuelle again. She's also run well on faster ground and on soft ground. So I think I would say the European horsemen, if they really know that their horse is going to appreciate a lot more softer ground than firmer ground, they wouldn't bother shipping to the Breeders' Cup that's run in California.
Yeah, that's a great point. These horses can be versatile and handle it both firm to good or, real yielding soft ground. So, But I mean, typically most of the horses that come over and win on our firm ground have run at least one race in their lifetime. They would give their connections a feel that they're well suited for it. But so. And the other thing is, it's hard for us to really decipher unless you have the inside knowledge how firm and how much give there is to the ground over there. There have been horses though, Vance, that have fooled me in the past that I thought were just soft turf horses and took to our firm ground just seamlessly. So I try not to make too much of it, Ashley, but I do like that, like Vance said, having those races in the past to go on.
Well, I definitely will be looking to Vance's write-ups, Kelly's write-ups on these turf runners. And that's why I focus more on Idiomatic and Federal Judge for my takeaways in the Breeders' Cup, because we're moving back over to the dirt and U.S.-based runners. But for me, Idiomatic, having that 6.5 length win really stood out to me, gate to wire fashion. We had talked about, did this horse take a step back this season? But this really showed me, even though it was against just 5 rivals, it looked like the horse that was the champion horse last season, and now maybe could be the favorite in the distaff against Torpedo Anna, who's probably going to take some money as well. But I think this performance here, you certainly have to respect Idiomatic in her title defense at the Breeders' Cup. As for Federal Judge, I wanted to note that this horse clocked a final time, let's see, we're 108.20, which if you look at the Breeders' Cup Sprint, that would rank around 8th in all-time fastest finishes in the Breeders' Cup Sprint. So I took note of this horse, also 107 Brisnet speed figure in that victory in the Phoenix. So, this Breeders' Cup Sprint division, I feel like, is kind of wide open. The Chosen Brawn obviously is going to be that big name in California, but just lost his last start. So I feel like this could go to anybody right now, and Federal Judge might be the now horse heading into the Breeders' Cup Sprint.
Yeah, and that's a good point about with Idiomatic. I mean, the distaff probably won't be one of the biggest fields, so she'll probably be the second choice, but she's not going to be odds on like Torpedo Anna. And sometimes these horses show a chink in the armor in the fall, and they don't. I mean, they need more time than just 6 weeks to get it back. So it'll be interesting to see if Torpedo Anna shows up with her A game, because it looks like Idiomatic's set for a top showing.
Yeah, Idiomatic had a 103 Brisnet speed figure, a season best. And then Torpedo Anna, of course, raced in the Cotillion and had a 97 last out, but a 107 in the Traverse. And I fully expect a bigger number coming off that layoff at Del Mar. Well, let's move over to the juvenile races. We had the Kentucky Derby and Oaks Prep races at Keeneland, Santa Anita, and Belmont at the Big A. So, James, who stood out to you?
Well, after hitting the gate and rallying to a narrow win in the Grade 1 Hopeful in his second start, I thought Chancellor McPatrick really continued to impress, winning the Saturday Champagne. He actually broke on top from the far outside, but it was a matter of strides before he had retreated towards the back of the pack. And he trailed several lengths behind the next to last horse in that 10-horse field down the backstretch. But when he launched his rally going into the far turn, it was really eye-catching. He's circled rivals, I thought, brilliantly. Reached second by the top of the stretch. And I got to give the runner-up credit. I thought Tip Top Thomas, off of that narrow win on the 6-furlong maiden win on the Travers undercard. That's always a maiden race to watch at Saratoga. And Tip Top Thomas was coming off a real nice debut win. I thought he ran a huge race. I thought he ran a winning race. He had horse left. He was on a clear lead approaching the top of the stretch, and he dug in gamely, and Chancellor McPatrick was just too good for him. Those two were in their own race. It was a long way back to third, and I like the way Chancellor McPatrick put away Tip Top Thomas to win going away by 2+ lengths. Looks like he's going to get some pace in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, and he's going to take some beating, and he looks really well built to for longer distances next spring. East Avenue is going to bring speed to the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. He's now 2 for 2 after a convincing win in the Breeders' Futurity. Really took it to him from the start, just like he did in his debut for Brendan Walsh. And Citizen Bull led wire to wire in the Grade 1 American Pharoah at Santa Anita on Saturday. But I do think he's going to revert to stalking tactics. There wasn't that much speed in the race. And when he flashed to the front at the break, I thought the rest of the field just sort of let him have it. So it was sort of a moderate pace. But I got to give him credit because he was a really nice debut winner, Citizen Bull was, over a nice horse who just broke his maiden in real sharp fashion for Baffert. And then he came back and got beat 5 lengths in the Del Mar Futurity. So the jury was a little bit out on Citizen Bull. That race got 100 Brisnet speed rating. That's the top number from all these Breeders' Cup juvenile preps, so you have to respect that number. As far as the fillies, non-compliant and Scottish Lassie in the Oakleaf and the Frazette at Aqueduct, both recorded convincing wins. They look like they're going to be main contenders to me in the juvenile fillies. Immersive did not run as fast, winning the Spinster on Friday, but she's 3 for 3. Looks like even if she's not good enough to win the juvenile fillies, could be a real serious horse for Godolphin and Brad Cox next year. So I won't take anything away from her win. And I think I covered all 6 juvenile races, Vance.
Yeah, I'll just concentrate on one horse, and that was East Avenue. Although that was kind of a perfect trip and on an uncontested lead in the Breeders' Futurity, he does look extremely talented for Godolphin and trainer Brendan Walsh. And Walsh said after the race that he thinks he's his best 2-year-old since Maxfield, who won the Breeders' Futurity 5 years ago and was an intended starter in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile at Santa Anita, but he was sidelined by a foot abscess a few days before that race and was scratched. I recall being on the Maxfield bandwagon at the time and actually voted for him as champion 2-year-old over Storm the Court, who won the Breeders' Cup and is perhaps the most modest winner of that race in history. And I think I brought all of this up earlier this year in this space, but now, one negative for East Avenue is that he won't have had to overcome any adversity in either of his 2 starts going into the juvenile, but his style of racing on or near the lead, I think, might be preferred in a general sense over that of Chancellor McPatrick, who so far has just been kind of a one-run closer, and sometimes a horse like that is going to need a lot to go his own way, not only as far as trip, but of course Chancellor McPatrick is also going to be trying 2 turns for the first time. I think he's going to get it just fine, but it's just one thing that he hasn't had to do yet, but East Avenue has so far. So East Avenue to me was kind of the standout performance among the Derby contenders. Ashley,
I'm with you. Noted East Avenue's win going gate to wire and already wired the field by 8 lengths on his debut. And then Brendan Walsh also mentioned, that he had to bring him to Churchill to race him or work him with older horses because he couldn't find a 2-year-old that could even push him, and said even the older horses were having trouble doing that. So definitely spoke highly of East Avenue. As for Scottish Lassie, I did want to note that there were 3 scratches that were pretty significant in that race. So I don't know if that takes away a little bit from the result, but it was a 9-length win. But you didn't have the Queen's MG. You didn't have, what was that? It was like an Italian name. It was that, I can't find it in my notes, but you had 2 debut winners as well that scratched. So
Senza Parole.
Senza Parole, that's right. Without words. I was without words on what that name was. But there you go. That's an Italian lesson for you. So yes. I think those scratches maybe could have affected the race a little bit, but certainly a very good runner for McKenzie, which I'll talk about in our next segment. So I'll switch it back over to you, Vance. What else caught your
hold on just 1 second. Senza Parole was going to be, she was 3 to 5 on the morning line, and she was I think the most the top 2-year-old, male or female, on the dirt, arguably, coming into these last couple weekends. If she had rolled in that Frazette, she was going to be an enormous favorite. So her absence really throws that division, or that even the juvenile fillies, I think, just makes it much more wide open, where it was looking like, she was looking like Cogburn coming into the Frazette in a sense.
Wow. It's pretty high praise.
Yeah.
Well, Vance, what else caught your eye from the weekend?
Well, there's an adage that says there are no bad Kentucky derbies, but some are better than others. I think the same applies to the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe, which James alluded to earlier. Admittedly, I gave the winner Blue Stocking some short shrift ahead of the race, but I think it's safe to argue that this is the only ARC she was ever likely to win. The fact of the matter is the Arc de Triomphe this year was subpar. Relatively speaking, England and Ireland's best 3-year-old City of Troy and Economics weren't pointed into the race. France's 2 best horses, Goliath and Calandigan, were ineligible due to being geldings. Now, Blue Stocking did have a great form line going into the Arc. She was a clear second to Goliath and the King George VI and Queen Elizabeth in July, and she had also run easily the fastest of the Arc trials at Longchamp 3 weeks ago, winning the Prix Vermeil. Still, she went off at 5-1 in the U.S. pool, and that was far too short a price for me to take on a filly whose career form overall didn't necessarily stand out over several others in the field who I felt had a bit more upside going into the race. So I always regret not cashing in a race I invest money in, but I don't regret not backing Blue Stocking at 5-1 in this race. So lesson learned for next year, but I'm not crying over spilled milk. James?
Well, I mean, Vance and I are on the same page with the ARC. We will have a head-to-head bet. I'll take Carl Spackler, and he'll be picking any European he wants in the Breeders' Cup Mile that we'll get into down the road. But for what else caught my eye, I'm going to mention Dono Momentum. He switched to turf with the nose allowance win on the August 24th Travers Undercard, and then he went into the Giopani Stakes. We're seeing it right here on Thursday. Excuse me. And he's in the green silks. He was on the lead from the start. Got a little bit of a challenge coming into the stretch, and you can see he turns it back and wins, really going away a little bit here under the wire. I thought or regained. That was. I don't even know if that was. I'm not sure that was the right race. Well, that was the nose. That's the nose. That's the nose allowance win at Saratoga where he rallied off the pace. On Thursday, he won by 2 lengths. He easily beat Royal Majesty. The thing I like about Dono Momentum, he's a 3-year-old son of Uncle Mo. Uncle Mo, underrated turf sire. He sired multiple Grade 1 winners on the turf. And this colt showed high speed, breaking his maiden and running second in allowance. He got a little exposed in the Amsterdam, running fourth. And Tom Morley has switched him to turf. He won that race we just saw in the Travers Day, rallied from 4th that day, and really looked good doing it. Really a game performance because the 2 horses he beat, Greenlight and Vesting, have both had a stakes experience. And then in this Giopani, Take Me to the Church, who was favored for Brad Cox, ran 3rd, and Royal Majesty, who was 2nd. Royal Majesty had been beaten by less than 2 lengths by Legend of Time, Trickery, and Carson's Run. So, I mean, we have this horse, Dono Momentum, just getting started, just figuring things out, beating these stakes horses in his last 2 stakes experienced horses in his last 2 turf starts. He's really improved off that allowance win to the Giopani. All his best races are in front of him. He's an extremely promising turf runner for Tom Morley. And then finally, I'll mention on Wednesday, after the early pick 5 went unhit on Sunday in the early sequence, we have a $265,000 pick 5 carryover into races 1 through 5. It's on the early. This graphic's not right. It's on races 1 through 5 on Wednesday, the early pick 5 sequence. 3 of the 5 races drew at least 12 horses. So Ashley and Vance, I've got some handicapping work to do.
Yeah, and we also have that late pick 5 hit it and split it at Keeneland throughout the meet at twinspires. So also check that out if you want to play for a little bit more money on top of that carryover. If someone does hit it, maybe you'll hit it on Wednesday, James. Take all the money.
Hey, that's the plan.
And I'll wrap it up talking about McKenzie. On Thursday on the jury, I talked about McKenzie as a first crop sire. Had a number of runners in the Kentucky Derby and Oaks prep races with a chance to climb the rankings by progeny earnings, and ended up going from 5th to 2nd in progeny earnings over the weekend because you had that win with Chancellor McPatrick in the Champagne, Scottish Lassie in the Frizette, and then Tom Amos filly Quick Kick finished 2nd in the Alcibiades. And we also had Mackenzie Street finish 3rd in the American Pharaoh. There was also Paradise City entered in the Frizette, but was a stake scratch, so didn't have a chance to earn money there. But Tis the Law remains on top because Tis the Law also had wins this weekend with Non-Compliant in the Oak Leaf and Scythian in the Miss Grillo, I'm not sure how you say it, that was rescheduled. So interesting little battle we've got going on in the first crop sire rankings, and some really good first crop sires. Maybe we'll see one of them produce the Kentucky Derby winner or Oaks winner next year. It's not out of the question. We saw Keen Ice do it with Rich Strike and Good Magic with Mage. So maybe we have another one in here.
Oh, yeah. And Mage is youngest brother. I mean, it was Mage, and then Dornick won the Belmont this year. And I saw where that Baeza's working for his first start. He's the 2-year-old, the latest full brother to those Mage, or brother to the Mage and Dornick. Vacoma and Complexity are top two and winners, but neither one of them have a serious Breeders' Cup contender for the juvenile races. McKenzie, Tis the Law, both do. So kudos to those two sires.
And we're all covering first crop sires, but I feel like none of ours are really doing much lately. I have 1,000 words to Queen's MG Scratch, so.
Well, Vance has a game winner, and he has gaming,
okay.
So he has a good one.
Mine does have a shot at the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, too.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's all the time we have today for the Racing Roundtable. I will be out again next week. One last vacation, I promise. And yeah, we'll reconvene. I guess Nick Tamaro will probably be joining you. So enjoy. I guess you can talk about the Reds and the Astros, who's going to come out on top next season.
Yeah, along with all the Breeders' Cup, we'll be heading right into it in the weeks to come. So we'll get real excited this time of year, Ashley and Vance.
Yeah. All right. We'll see you all next time.